Yang Yi returned to Talisman Peak and contacted Su Qingshe with a transmission talisman. It wasn't long before Su Qingshe arrived here. In his room, Yang Yi said in a low voice, "Qingshe, I feel that this matter is very unusual, so I had to notify you. A few inner court disciples are merely going to temper themselves. Why would you say that it's unusual?" said Su Qingshe. "You aren't aware of that Earth Bear King's identity?" said Yang Yi with surprise. "Its identity?" Su Qingshe was puzzled. Yang Yi took a deep breath and said, "That Earth Bear King isn't a king-rank dark beast at all. It's already halfway into the spirit rank. So, Murong Yao and the others are simply courting death by trying to temper themselves with it." Su Qingshe was shocked and said, "Halfway into the spirit rank? How do you know that?" "I'm not doubting what you said, and I'm just curious. I've fought it," Yang Yi said. "Moreover, I watched with my own 2 eyes as it slapped the Origin School's barrier ward into pieces." Su Qingshe's expression turned solemn when she heard this. She was naturally clearly aware of the Origin School's barrier ward. It was something that only spirit rank experts could forcefully blast into pieces, yet that Earth Bear King was able to blast it into pieces. This was sufficient to prove its strength. Moreover, that Earth Bear King is no ordinary bear. It's a soldier that the Dark Beast Empire sent to reside in Death Mountain Range and stop humans from entering the Grand Myriad Mountain. Even if Murong Yao and the others possess trump cards of their own, and they are able to survive and kill it instead, then Murong Yao and the others would be pursued and killed by the Dark Beast Empire. In short, so long as Murong Yao and the others headed there, then it would practically always lead to death. Yang Yi continued. Su Qingshe remained silent for a short while before she said, "Was it merely because of this that you said this matter is unusual?" Yang Yi shook his head and said, "I think that this is probably a plot against the geniuses of the Sword Sect that will be participating in the Ascension rankings. Just think about it, what would be the outcome if Murong Yao and the others are really able to kill that Earth Bear King?" Before Su Qingshe could answer him, he continued, "Even if they are lucky enough to escape death, they would definitely be crippled. The Earth Bear King's strength is extremely terrifying. With my body that was comparable to a 9th rank dark beast at the time, I'd completely lost my ability to do battle after receiving a single slap from it. Do you think Murong Yao and the others would be able to endure a single strike from it?" Su Qingshe's face was icy cold. If it was really as Yang Yi said, then these main forces of the Sword Sect would practically be finished, and once they were finished, the Sword Sect would be finished during the Ascension rankings as well. After a short moment of silence, Su Qingshe said, "You think this is a plot of the Ghost Sects?" "I'm not sure," Yang Yi said, "but I feel that there's something wrong with that Ouyang Yen. I don't have any proof, and it's merely a feeling. If there's really something wrong with him, then it wouldn't be just the Earth Bear King that's waiting for Murong Yao and the others, and there would definitely be other experts of the Ghost Sect as well. At that time, they wouldn't be able to return no matter what trump cards they possessed." Ouyang Yen joined the Sword Sect at the age of 16 and became an inner court disciple at the age of 19. His natural talent isn't the best in the Sword Sect, but he's extremely hardworking and has very good relationships with others in the Sword Sect. He hasn't committed any mistakes in the past, and the elders had a very good impression and evaluation of him. If there's something wrong with him, then it would be the same for many people in the Sword Sect," said Su Qingshe. Yang Yi suddenly smiled lightly. He knew that it was a thankless task, and the only reason he'd poked his nose into it was entirely out of consideration for the woman who stood before him. But it was very obvious that she didn't believe his guesses. However, he didn't mind because the deaths of the Sword Sect's geniuses didn't really matter to him. In any case, he'd warned her. Su Qingshe seemed to have noticed Yang Ye's emotions and said, "It's not that I don't believe you, but this matter can't be handled hastily. After all, if a disciple is wrongly accused, then it wouldn't just disappoint that disciple, it would disappoint the other disciples as well. However, one must always be vigilant against others. I'll follow them from the shadows and investigate Ouyang Yen in secret." "I understand," Yang Yi said. "However, I don't approve of you going alone. If it's really a scheme of the Ghost Sects, then they would have definitely sent experts to lay an ambush within the Grand Myriad Mountains. Moreover, there would definitely be more than one. If you go alone, then the slightest mistake wouldn't just cause you to be unable to save them, you might even perish along with them. Xianxia nodded lightly, and then she suddenly said, "Were you there when the tomb of Emperor Zhou was opened a few months ago?" Yang Yi was stunned. He didn't know why Xianxia asked this question, but he still nodded. 3 disciples of my sword sect and the disciples of the origin school, ghost sect, and flower palace perished within the tomb. Do you know the cause of their deaths? Asked Xianxia again. Yang Yi nodded and said, I do. Xianxia remained silent for a short moment before she said, I headed there to investigate at that time and asked some people about it. I found out that some conflict had arisen between you and Dong Wuxiang. Were you the one that killed them? I'd thought of killing him, but it wasn't me. Yang Yi spoke calmly. After that, he told her about what happened in the chamber. After a short while, Xianxia said, How laughable! All the sects are pursuing the murderer, yet the murderers are the disciples of their own sections. When she spoke up to hear, she paused for a moment and said, If you intend to kill a disciple of the Flower Palace in the future, then you must not leave any proof behind. Otherwise, it wouldn't just harm you but your mother as well. After all, your mother is still in their hands. If they threaten you with her, would you be able to avoid heading to the Flower Palace to give your life away? Yang Ye's heart shook because he truly hadn't given this any thought. Right, my mother is still in their hands. If the Flower Palace finds out that I killed its disciples, then it would probably intensify the torture my mother is experiencing. At that time, I would really have sinned. In the future, I absolutely can't make a move rashly before I'm 100% certain in my ability to accomplish it without anyone knowing. Yang Yi decided in his heart. Besides that, the sword commanding elder, Yulin, isn't the sword commanding elder anymore. Xianxia suddenly said, He's very regretful for what he did to both of you on that day. Yang Yi shook his head and said, Xianxia, I know you want me to rejoin the sword sect, but truthfully speaking, I really don't have a good impression of the sword sect. Moreover, all of you really don't have to regard me as so important because the sword sect wouldn't be destroyed if I, Yang Yi, am not a part of it. You're very important to the sword sect, said Xianxia. Let's not discuss this matter, all right? Xianxia's intentions to make him join the sword sect was a slight headache to Yang Yi. It was impossible for him to join the sword sect, even if it was Xianxia that asked. After all, could anyone guarantee that he wouldn't be abandoned by this sect for the second time? Even if the sword sect guaranteed to not do that, he wouldn't believe it. Xianxia sighed in her heart and said, Do you really have no nostalgia towards the sword sect? I do. Yang Yi stared Xianxia in the eyes and said, If you weren't in the sword sect, then I wouldn't have notified anyone in the sword sect about this matter. If you weren't in the sword sect, then I wouldn't represent it at the ascension rankings. If it was affection, then it was. Yang Yi refused to deceive himself. Xianxia's eyelids twitched. She gazed at him for a short while before she moved her gaze away and said, Thank you for everything you've done for me, but I'm very sorry. I don't want to consider any matters of the heart right now. Yang Yi said, I don't want to as well. Since both of us don't want to, then let's allow nature to take its course. Because the matters of life are unpredictable, and my enemies are so formidable, so I, Yang Yi, might not exist anymore in the future. Yang Yi wasn't a pessimistic person, but he was very clearly aware of the enemy he had to face. This enemy hadn't taken the initiative to take any action against him for now, but that day would come in the end. At that time, he didn't know whether he would be able to survive his enemy's attacks and kill that enemy of his. After all of these were matters of the future. You really intend to go against the Flower Palace? Asked Xianxia. It isn't I who wishes to go against them, and it's they who wish to go against me. Yang Yi said, It's impossible for me to not rescue my mother, and I have to take revenge for her. So, a conflict will definitely arise between me and the Flower Palace. Even though I'm merely an ant in the eyes of the Flower Palace now, I believe that this ant, I, will one day be able to shake this colossus. Xianxia sighed lightly. Truthfully speaking, She didn't want Yang Yi to go against the Flower Palace because it was really no different than an ant trying to shake a tree. However, she knew that it was utterly impossible to make Yang Yi give up on his mother. But even if Yang Yi had comprehended sword intent and was able to control dark beasts, it was extremely unrealistic to think of going against the Flower Palace by relying solely on that. Su Qingshi left. Right after that, a white glow flashed into appearance, and then Xianxia appeared before Yang Yi. That woman from before is the woman you love? Xianxia glanced at the direction Su Qingshi left towards while a wisp of a charming smile suffused the corners of her mouth. She said, "So you like the icy cold type?" Yang Yi glanced at her and said, "Do you need something? Can I not come to talk to you just like that? Or you really hate me that much?" Xianxia was slightly angry while slight moisture had even appeared in her eyes. It seemed as if she'd been hurt by Yang Yi. Yang Yi remained unmoved and said, "The only thing you fancy in my entire possession is that tiny vortex. You're already staying within it, so you don't have to act friendly to me like this. Because I don't have anything that's worthy of that. Would you believe it if I said I took a fancy to you?" Xianxia's eyes carried an embarrassed expression while her face was indescribably charming. Yang Yi frowned and said, "There's no need to execute such techniques against me. You ought to know that it's useless against me. You're really an insensitive block of wood." Xianxia rolled her eyes at Yang Yi, restrained her smile, and then said seriously, "That little fellow of yours seems to be on the verge of advancement." "The little fellow is about to advance?" Yang Yi was stunned. He immersed his senses into his body and investigated the little fellow's current state. At this moment, the violet mink wei lying lazily with its eyes closed in the profound energy pool within the tiny vortex. Its entire body emanated a thin layer of violet light while the pool of profound energy beneath the little guy was ceaselessly bubbling as if it was boiling. Yang Yi opened his eyes and looked at her before he said, "The little fellow is going to advance into the king rank?" His voice carried a wisp of excitement and happiness. Even though the violet mink was merely a 9th rank dark beast and didn't possess any offensive abilities, its other abilities could be described as terrifying. Not only could it conceal one's aura, but the violet light barriers it created could also even resist the attacks of a spirit realm expert. Such abilities could really be described as terrifying. So, if the little fellow was able to advance into a king rank dark beast, then wouldn't its abilities transform along with it? Yang Yi was filled with anticipation. Xianxia suddenly asked, "Do you know why the little fellow refuses to tell you about its origins?" "Why?" asked Yang Yi. He'd always been extremely puzzled by this. Since the beginning, the violet mink had concealed its origins from him. Yang Yi knew the little fellow definitely had a reason for doing so, but he was still extremely curious about it. Xianxia smiled playfully and said, "I won't tell you." Yang Ye's face darkened, and he glared fiercely at Xianxia before he said, "I think you don't know as well, right? It seems to me like you're very afraid of the little fellow's bloodline pressure." "You don't have to try and infuriate me," Xianxia said. "As for its bloodline pressure, to tell you the truth, I'm indeed afraid of it. But I'm not afraid of it now because it's only a 9th rank dark beast now. Moreover, I can very honestly tell you that those in the entire Southern Territory who are capable of being unafraid of its bloodline pressure can be counted with a single hand. It's your fortune that it has chosen to follow you. Right, you have the tiny vortex, so it's fortunate as well." "Miss Scene," Yang Yi said with a serious expression, "what exactly is the little fellow's origins? Moreover, why doesn't the little fellow tell me about it? I know it wouldn't harm me, but I'm still very curious." Xianxia was silent for a short while before she sighed in the end and said, "Actually, I don't have a very clear understanding of its origins as well. I've merely heard of its clan, and I never expected that they really exist. You've heard of the 4 divine beasts, right? I can only tell you that it isn't inferior to the divine beasts. Moreover, even the dragon clan of legend doesn't dare rashly offend the little fellow's clan. Because a mature spatial mink is truly too terrifying. Even the dragon clan of legend don't dare offend it." Yang Yi was visibly moved. He'd heard of the dragon clan. How terrifying were they? Supposedly, even Monarch Realm experts were unable to blast through their bodies, so it was obvious how terrifying they were. Moreover, this didn't include the other abilities of dragons. Yet the little fellow's clan was actually able to make even dragons fear offending it. So didn't that mean the little fellow would be as terrifying as a dragon once it matured? Xianxia was slightly excited when he thought up to hear. How could he not be? Once the little fellow grew up, wouldn't it be equivalent to Xianxia, possessing the help of an existence that was even more formidable than a Monarch Realm expert? As for why it refuses to tell you its origins, I presume it has its own reasons. In short, you just have to know that it has no ill intent to you. Xianxia continued. Xianxia nodded and said with a smile, "You're right. The little fellow doesn't carry any ill intent towards me at any rate. As for its origins, I believe that it will definitely take the initiative to tell me once the time is right." "You're really able to let things go, huh?" Xianxia smiled, and then said seriously, "There's enmity between you and the Flower Palace? What? Perhaps we can collaborate." Xianxia smiled and said, "In any case, I have enmity with the Flower Palace. After all, it was amongst the powers that annihilated my Shang dynasty all those years ago. We have a common enemy, and since it's a common enemy, then why don't we collaborate against it?" Xianxia was slightly moved by this suggestion, but he shook his head in next to no time. He hadn't forgotten that the Flower Palace wasn't this woman's only enemy, and it included the Grand Qin Empire and all the 6 great powers. If he joined forces with her, then it was very likely that he would be swept into the enmity between this woman and those powers. Xianxia merely had enmity with the Flower Palace, and he only desired to annihilate it. He wasn't interested in going against the other powers. Xianxia's beautiful brows knit together slightly when she saw Xianxia shake his head, and she said, "I know that with your natural talent and potential, you ought to be able to go against the Flower Palace in the future. But that might be something that only comes to pass very, very long from now. If you join forces with me, then we'll be able to shake the Flower Palace in a short period of time. I can tell you frankly that the 12 gold guards aren't my only trump card. What other trump cards do you have?" Xianxia was slightly curious. "I can't tell you about the rest. I can only tell you that my Shang dynasty's Grand Preceptor, Shengong Mao, is still alive, and he was already a Monarch Realm expert a few hundred years ago," said Xianxia. Xianxia gasped when he heard this, and then he said, "I know why you dare take revenge now. It turns out that you possess this super trump card. Indeed, it seems to be slightly possible for you to take revenge with the backing of a Monarch Realm expert." In the past, he thought Xianxia was courting death by seeking revenge. But now he felt that she did have a chance at success. A Monarch Realm expert and those 12 gold guards seemed to be sufficient to shake the Flower Palace. Moreover, this woman still had other trump cards. Obviously, the Shang dynasty was a dynasty in the end, and it was impossible for it to lack loyal subjects. Once this woman was able to seek out these loyal subjects, Xianxia didn't dare continue on this train of thought. Just think about it, if such people really existed, then how could their strengths be weak? How could the strength of people who'd lived for hundreds of years be weak? What do you think? If we work together, we'll have a good chance of toppling the Flower Palace." Xianxia continued. Xianxia took a deep breath and said, "Missine, truthfully speaking, I was slightly moved by your words, but I'll still be refusing." "Why?" Xianxia was puzzled. "Firstly, your objective is to topple the Grand Qin Empire and the 6 great powers, while my target is the Flower Palace alone. If I collaborate with you, then it's very likely that my enemies would grow from just the Flower Palace to include the Grand Qin Empire and all the 6 great powers. At that time, even if I was able to rescue my mother, my family would probably be unable to live peacefully for eternity. Moreover, I don't trust you because my intuition tells me that you don't want to collaborate with me just to go against the Flower Palace." Xianxia spoke frankly. Yes, he felt that this woman's intentions to collaborate with him didn't stop at the Flower Palace. Even though it was only a guess of his, he believed this intuition of his. Moreover, Xianxia understood a principle. It was best to form a collaboration with the precondition that both sides had equal strengths. Otherwise, the weaker side would definitely suffer horrible consequences. At this moment, he was the weaker side when compared to Xianxia. Xianxia remained silent for a short while before she said, "You're very cautious. But I believe that you'll definitely choose to collaborate with me in the future." As soon as she finished speaking, she didn't say another word before entering Yang Ye's tiny vortex. 2 days later, Xianxia came to Talisman Peak once more. Ouyang Yen was a traitor. These were the first words that Xianxia spoke upon arriving here. "A member of the Ghost Sect?" asked Yang Yi. She nodded with a gloomy expression and said, "Just as you said, it really was a plot of the Ghost Sect that targeted the disciples participating in the Ascension rankings. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to kill those experts of the Ghost Sect who were lying in ambush within the Grand Myriad Mountains. It's even to the extent that Ouyang Yen escaped as well. They dispatched an Exalt Realm expert?" asked Yang Yi. Xianxia shook her head and said, 3 Spirit Realm experts. I was careless and only brought a single Spirit Realm expert along. Not only was I unable to kill them, but Murong Yao and the others were also almost killed. I really was careless. Yang Yi remained silent for a moment before he said, "Xianxia, how many disciples of the Sword Sect do you think belong to the Ghost Sect?" Xianxia's pupils constricted. Right, even Ouyang Yen was a spy of the Ghost Sect. Then how many more members of the Ghost Sect remain within the Sword Sect? Moreover, what sort of positions do they hold within the Sword Sect? Inner court disciples? Elite disciples? Or perhaps elders? If there are even spies of the Ghost Sect amongst the elders, then the Sword Sect. Xianxia didn't dare continue on this train of thought. Yang Yi sighed and said, "Xianxia, to be honest, I think the Sword Sect is already at death's door. Being at death's door isn't terrifying. What's terrifying is the Sword Sect hasn't realized it, or perhaps it refuses to admit that it's at death's door and still thinks it's a member of the 6 great powers in the Southern Territory. Indeed, the Sword Sect is still a member of the 6 great powers, but Xianxia, let me ask you, what sort of consequences would the Sword Sect face if it didn't possess Senior Taoist Zue?" Xianxia's face turned slightly pale. She took a deep breath after a short while, and then a wisp of bitterness appeared on her face as she said, "The Sword Sect would probably cease to exist without Martial Uncle Zue. Even if it remains, it would be reduced to a second-rate power." Yang Yi said, "So I feel that even if someone from the Sword Sect is able to ascend onto the Ascension rankings, it would be unable to change the situation the Sword Sect is in right now. Because I feel that the path of the sword that the disciples of the Sword Sect have taken is mistaken. Including you, Xianxia. Your path of the sword is mistaken." Xianxia was shocked when she heard this and said, "What do you mean? Those that cultivate the sword would rather break than bend, rather die than submit." Yang Yi spoke slowly and said, "These words were spoken by the founding ancestor of the Sword Sect, and it can be said to be the true essence of the Sword Tao. But take a look at the Sword Sect right now. Can anyone accomplish that? For the sake of avoiding forming enmity with the Flower Palace, the Sword Commanding Elder intended to hand my younger sister and me over. His sword is bent. The various elders of the Sword Sect and all its disciples, you included, have too many considerations and worries in your hearts. All of you constantly put the overall situation of the sect first, yet have never realized that it's exactly this that caused your heart towards the Sword Tao to be covered in layers of restraints." Xianxia's face grew even paler. Yang Yi continued, "Think about it yourself. If a disciple of the Origin School bullied any one of the disciples of the Sword Sect or elders like you, would any one of you dare to draw your swords against them? Perhaps some would. But there's no doubt that many considerations like the identity of his enemy and the consequences of taking such action would run through that person's mind before he drew his sword. This is a normal human reaction. But let me ask you, can a disciple of the Sword Sect with a restrained heart and sword revive the Sword Sect?" Xianxia's face was ghastly pale while she clenched her fists tightly. "It's the fault of the Sword Sect's leadership that the hearts and swords of the sect's disciples are restrained." Yang Yi said, "That day in the Grand Myriad Mountains, I killed 3 disciples of the Origin School. If the Origin School found out about it and asks the Sword Sect to hand me over, then what do you think the Sword Sect would do? For the sake of the entire sect, the Sword Sect would have handed me over. Under such circumstances, do you think the disciples of the Sword Sect can draw their swords as they please? Could it be that the Sword Sect's path really is mistaken? Xianxia muttered in a low voice while confusion appeared in her beautiful eyes. As he gazed at Xianxia, who had a ghastly pale countenance and a confused look in her eyes, pain flashed in Xianxia's heart, but he still continued. You should have heard the incident related to Senior Taoist Zue, right? He killed a disciple of the Origin School, but how did the Sword Sect treat him? Actually, I slightly understand why Senior Taoist Zue refuses to join the Sword Sect. Because the Sword Sect has already become a form of restraint to him, and he would be tied up by all sorts of things while being a member of it as one would. The reason being he would have to consider all sorts of things before taking any action. Under such circumstances, how would one cultivate in the Sword Dao? You refuse to join the Sword Sect because of this reason as well? Xianxia gazed at Xianxia as she spoke. Xianxia smiled and said, Xianxia, you once told me that the Sword Sect would absolutely not hand me over to anyone if I joined the Sword Sect. I believe you, but I don't believe the Sword Sect. I did many things while I went out to temper myself in the Grand Myriad Mountains during these past few months, and I killed many people and offended many powers throughout that time as well. I think that if all of these matters were exposed, then not only would I be unable to protect myself after joining the Sword Sect, it would kill me even more swiftly. Because I dare guarantee that not only would the Sword Sect not protect me from these powers, it would help those powers deal with me. You've comprehended sword insight, and you're extremely important to the Sword Sect. So it would definitely not do that, said Xianxia. Xianxia didn't argue. He walked slowly to the window, opened it, and gazed at the precipitous mountains in the distance that were covered by clouds. He took a deep breath and said, Xianxia, actually the Ghost Sect isn't the Sword Sect's only enemy. The Sword Sect is like a child that's trying to take a share of food from amidst a group of adults. If there wasn't an adult standing behind this child, then the child would have been killed by the adults a very long time ago. But I believe that the adult that stands behind the child wouldn't be able to deter all those adults forever. Xianxia walked over to Xianxia's side. She gazed towards the distance while a wisp of cold light flashed in her eyes. She said, This child isn't a baby. If this child is forced into a corner, then even if it can't kill those adults, it's very easy for it to make those adults suffer losses. Xianxia sighed and said, Xianxia, what would you do if that day really comes? Xianxia was stunned, and then she said, If the Sword Sect exists, then so do I. If it perishes, then so will I. Her voice was firm. Xianxia fell silent. He didn't want to see this come to pass, but he knew that he was unable to change her decision. However, it was too early for him to worry about all of this now. Even though the Sword Sect had declined, it wasn't something that any power could annihilate at will. Unless a few powers joined forces, of course. But that was slightly unrealistic because there would be so many problems to resolve in order to accomplish that. I came to look for you this time because I wanted to tell you that it's best to not leave the Sword Sect if there's nothing important for you to attend to. Xianxia suddenly spoke these words. Xianxia knew what she meant and asked. The Sword Sect didn't dispatch experts to assassinate the participating disciples of the Ghost Sect? Xianxia shook her head slowly. Why? Xianxia said, They've already started to act against the Sword Sect, so why does the Sword Sect still face these attacks passively? Wouldn't it be better to take the initiative to attack? Xianxia said, Because the Sword Sect worries about too many things. Her voice carried dense helplessness. Xianxia suddenly asked, Xianxia, what's your status like in the Sword Sect? Xianxia turned her head to glance at Xianxia before she said, I don't have a specific status and don't possess any real authority. Xianxia frowned and said, With your identity and strength, it shouldn't be difficult for you to obtain a position as an inner court elder, right? I only wanted to cultivate my sword Dao in the past, and I didn't have the time to do all of that. Xianxia gazed at him and said, Why do you ask? Xianxia arranged his words and said, Xianxia, since you want to revive the Sword Sect, then why do you not take direct control of it? Control the Sword Sect in your hands. In this way, You can bring great reformation to the Sword Sect. Take control of the Sword Sect? Su Qingshi frowned lightly because she'd never thought in this way. Yang Yi nodded and said, "Since the Sword Sect is so important to you, then just become the sect master of the Sword Sect. After that, change the Sword Sect according to your will. Changing the Sword Sect can't be accomplished with the hard work of just you alone. But if you become the Sword Sect's master, then you would be able to change numerous disciples of the sect. What do you think?" Su Qingshi was slightly tempted. After a short while, she looked at Yang Yi and said, "If I become the Sword Sect's master, would you join the Sword Sect?" Yang Yi smiled bitterly. This question again. Yang Yi turned around to gaze at Su Qingshi. The woman before him still wore a white dress while her beautiful hair was spread out behind her, and 2 strands of gorgeous hair hung down from her temples and swayed along with the wind. She had an exquisite appearance, a curvaceous body, and a tranquil and elegant bearing. All of this caused Yang Yi to feel his heart speed up slightly. Su Qingshi was slightly unable to bear Yang Yi's gaze, and she turned her head to look out the window. Yang Yi suddenly asked, "Qingshi, do you still remember the agreement between the two of us?" Su Qingshi nodded. "I'm wondering whether you would give me a chance to pursue you if I wasn't able to ascend onto the ascension rankings. Or perhaps, if the others from the Sword Sect were able to ascend to the top 3 positions on the ascension rankings, then would you give them a chance to pursue you?" said Yang Yi. He'd thought of this question a very long time ago. The 2 of them had been together beneath Death Abyss that day, yet he wondered throughout this period he was in contact with her about whether she was ceaselessly helping and protecting him because it was him, Yang Yi, or because he could ascend onto the ascension rankings to seize benefits for the Sword Sect. He'd thought of this question but had never given the answer any thought because such an answer was usually very cruel. Su Qingshi remained silent for a short moment before she said, "Is there any difference?" "Of course there is," Yang Yi said. "If you made that agreement with me for the sake of the Sword Sect, then let me tell you that you don't have to wrong yourself. I, Yang Yi, repay my debts. Since you've saved my life, then take my participation in the Ascension rankings on behalf of the Sword Sect as my way of repaying your kindness." Emotions weren't like the Sword Dao, and he couldn't do as he pleased. Yang Yi understood this principle. If the woman standing before him really didn't like him, then he wouldn't use the Ascension rankings to put pressure on her. Just as he'd said, Su Qingshi had rescued both him and his younger sister, so he would take participating in the Ascension rankings on behalf of the Sword Sect as a form of repayment to her. Actually, Yang Yi understood that if a person didn't possess strength, then no one in this world would like that person. However, Yang Yi still hoped that Su Qingshi had helped him and made that agreement with him because it was him, Yang Yi, and not because he could ascend the Ascension rankings for the Sword Sect. But Yang Yi wasn't confident that the answer would be the former. It sounded very conflicting, yet it wasn't at all. If Su Qingshi helped him because it would be him who she helped and had made that agreement with him for the exact same reason, then it proved that she cared about him. On the other hand, if it was because he could ascend onto the Ascension rankings and seize benefits for the Sword Sect, then it meant that if someone else could do the same, it was very likely that Su Qingshi would agree to the same or even worse conditions than those she promised Yang Yi. Yang Yi understood one thing very well. The Sword Sect was very important in Su Qingshi's heart. Su Qingshi remained silent, and so did Yang Yi. Both of them stood side by side before the window and gazed at the scenery in the distance. After a long time, Su Qingshi said, "The reason I didn't kill you at the bottom of Death Abyss wasn't that you had the potential to ascend the Ascension rankings, and it was instead because you disregarded your life to save me in the Grand Myriad Mountains. I went to save you at South Peace City because you were a disciple of the Sword Sect, and at the same time, I wanted to repay the debt I owe you for saving my life. As for the agreement between the two of us, even though I, Su Qingshi, want to revive the Sword Sect, I wouldn't do it in such a way. You've underestimated me, and you've underestimated yourself." Yang Yi smiled when he heard this, and it was a heartfelt smile, because he understood what she meant. Su Qingshi flipped her right hand, and a sheathed violet sword appeared in it. She said, "This is the low-grade Earth-rank sword, Violet Spirit. You don't just need a formidable strength when participating in the Ascension rankings, you need a formidable dark treasure as well. With this sword in your possession, Your strength out to improve greatly. Xianxia's heart felt warm, but he didn't take it. With a command in his heart, the loud sound of a sword being unsheathed resounded. He pointed at the space before him and said, I have a dark treasure already. A wisp of surprise flashed in Xianxia's eyes as she stretched out her hand to touch the hidden sword. And then she said, What an odd sword. With this sword and your sword control technique, its might would multiply. Was this given to you by that mysterious old man? Xianxia nodded. Xianxia nodded lightly, and then she passed Violet Spirit to Xianxia and said, You can treat that sword of yours as a trump card and take your opponents by surprise during the Ascension rankings. Use Violet Spirit at other times. Xianxia still wanted to refuse because he felt that Xianxia probably needed it more than he did. However, Xianxia didn't give him the chance to refuse at all because she immediately turned around and left. When she arrived at the door, Xianxia stopped and said, I'll seriously consider what you said about taking control of the Sword Sect. Besides that, don't leave the Sword Sect in the near future. After she finished speaking, she didn't stay here any longer and swiftly vanished from Xianxia's field of vision. Xianxia gazed at the direction Xianxia left towards for a short while before he finally withdrew his gaze. As he gazed at the sword in his hand, he felt that she hadn't given him this sword simply because of the reason she'd told him. Because he noticed that her expression was slightly abnormal when she gave it to him. After a short while, Xianxia shook his head and smiled. He said, It's merely a sword. I really like to let my thoughts run wild. Right at this moment, a violet glow flashed before the violet mink appeared before him. When he saw the violet mink, Xianxia hurriedly put the sword away and embraced the little fellow before he said, You've advanced to the king rank? The violet mink nodded while its eyes flickered with happiness. Xianxia asked excitedly, Do you feel any changes in yourself? The violet mink blinked before it raised its little claw and swung it at the enormous stone table at the center of the room. Under Xianxia's astounded gaze, a round violet light appeared before the violet mink, and then it directly blasted onto the stone table in the next moment. Bang! An enormous bang resounded as the stone table exploded into pieces. Xianxia gulped down a mouthful of saliva, and he felt slight disbelief. My God! What did I just see? The violet light that the little fellow executed was too swift, or did it directly ignore space? A white glow flashed as Xianxia appeared. She gazed at the violet mink while a wisp of fear flashed in her eyes. It really did ignore space. It has actually grasped spatial techniques at such a young age. Ignore space? Spatial techniques. Xianxia was puzzled. Xianxia took a deep breath and said, After one attains the Exalt realm, one would be able to comprehend the profundities of space. As soon as she finished speaking, she didn't speak another word. She took a deep glance at Xianxia and the violet mink before she entered Xianxia's tiny vortex again. Xianxia was slightly angry because this woman aroused his curiosity then left him like that. If it wasn't out of consideration that she was a spirit realm expert, he would really teach her a lesson. It was impossible to hope for an explanation from Xianxia. Xianxia gazed at the violet mink and said, Little fellow, do it against for me to see. The violet mink nodded and then waved its claw. A strand of violet light appeared before it, and in the next moment, it directly appeared on the wall in the distance and blasted a hole through it. Xianxia took a deep breath. He'd seen it clearly this time. The violet light emanated by the little fellow wasn't too swift. It had really ignored space, and he felt that such a method of attack was truly too terrifying. Even he was extremely fearful of it because this method of attack was truly too unusual, especially when it was utilized to launch a surprise attack. If the little fellow launched a surprise attack against him, then he knew that he would be unable to avoid it and could only go head-on against the violet mink's attack. Actually, even if it wasn't a surprise attack but a head-on collision, he would still be fearful of it. Why? Because the little fellow's speed was too swift. With the little fellow's unusual method of movement, then not to mention him, even a spirit realm expert wouldn't be able to catch up to the little fellow. So, when this ability of movement and attack were coupled together, the violet mink could really be said to be invincible amongst king-rank dark beasts. After a short while, Yang Ye's solemn expression broke into a smile. Luckily, the little fellow is with me. So, I don't have to feel worried or fearful because of this. I should be happy, and it's my opponents who should be fearful. The violet mink seemed to feel that the violet light was fun to play with, and it waved its little claw at the wall on the left. A violet light instantly blasted onto the left wall, causing a hole to appear there. In the next moment, the little fellow waved its little claw towards the right. Bang! In less than 2 breaths of time and before Yang Yi could recover from his shock, his room had collapsed. Yang Yi hurriedly embraced the little fellow that was getting more and more excited as it waved its little claw, and then he fled from the room. Outside the room, Yang Ye's face was completely dark as he gazed at his collapsed room. The violet mink seemed to know that it had done something wrong, so it flashed onto Yang Ye's shoulder before it ceaselessly rubbed its little head against Yang Ye's face while seeming to be obedient and trying to ingratiate itself with Yang Yi. 10 days later, at the teleportation platform. At this moment, the enormous square beneath the teleportation platform was densely covered with disciples of the inner court and outer court. Moreover, even some outer court elders and inner court elders were here as well. What did they come here for? It was naturally to send off the 10 disciples who stood on the teleportation platform. The ascension rankings wasn't just related to the sword sect's future. It was related to their honor as well. It was a form of collective honor. So long as someone was able to ascend the rankings, then the disciples of the sword sect would be much more respected when they left the sect in the future. Moreover, this honor wasn't just limited to the sword sect, and it included the person that accomplished the feat and extended to that person's family or clan as well, because so long as one was able to ascend the rankings, then the Grand Qin Empire would proclaim that person's name to the world. It was simply like becoming renowned in the Southern Territory. Becoming renowned in the Southern Territory was practically the dream of all young profounders. So, the participants were excited, and so were the others that had come to send them off because it would be their turn to participate in the future. As he gazed at the disciples below, Yang Yi sighed slightly with emotion. Only a short while ago he was one of them. Just like them, he'd taken the sword sect to be a form of strong support for himself, taken it to be his glory, and taken it to be a large and warm family. Unfortunately, he felt no reluctance or regret, and he just sighed with emotion. Suddenly, Yang Yi turned to look at the inner court disciple who stood around 3M to his right. This disciple wore a green robe and had a very handsome appearance, but he was staring at Yang Yi with a hostile gaze. Yang Yi frowned. He didn't know this person. Or it should be said that besides Morong Yao and Qin Feng, he didn't know the other 8 at all. So he didn't understand how he'd offended this green-robed disciple. After all, he'd kept a very low profile since returning to the sword sect, and he'd practically never left the Talisman Peak. When he saw Yang Yi look at him, the green-robed disciple glanced coldly at Yang Yi before withdrawing his gaze. His name is Situ Rong. He's a senior inner court disciple at the peak of the 9th rank of the First Heaven Realm. According to rumor, he's able to advance into the King Realm, and he'd intentionally suppressed his strength because of the ascension rankings. Suddenly, Morong Yao and Qin Feng walked over to Yang Yi before she spoke with a smile on her face. Yang Yi nodded to them as a form of greeting, and then he asked, "What does that have to do with me?" "It naturally concerns you." Morong Yao smiled and said, "He has a younger brother called Situ Bo who is a senior inner court disciple as well. His young brother was supposed to participate in the ascension rankings as well, but your sudden appearance caused Situ Bo to be pushed out of the list of candidates. Don't you think it concerns you?" "Why did that happen to his younger brother?" asked Yang Yi. "Because his younger brother is the weakest amongst the rest of us," said Morong Yao with a smile on her face. "So it's his younger brother's problem. What does that have to do with me?" Yang Yi shrugged. "He doesn't think so," said Morong Yao. "Then I can't do anything about it," said Yang Yi. "Aren't you afraid that he would look for trouble with you? He's at the peak of the 9th rank of the First Heaven Realm. Moreover, have you noticed? Besides Qin Feng and I who are new inner court disciples, all the other disciples obey his orders. Aren't you afraid?" said Morong Yao. Yang Yi glanced at her and said, "You and Qin Feng were pushed away? Smart." Morong Yao blinked and smiled. Amongst the 9 of us, Qin Feng and I possess the lowest realms of cultivation and are new inner court disciples. So they naturally look down upon us. Similarly, they will look down upon you as well. What do you think? Are you interested in joining forces with us? Yang Yi was just about to speak when 3 white rays of light flashed in the sky, and then 3 figures descended onto the teleportation platform. Yang Yi knew 2 of them, Elder Yu Hong and Su Qingshi. As for the other middle-aged man, Yang Yi had never seen him. However, based on the middle-aged man's dressing, he was presumably an inner court elder. Yu Hong swept his gaze past all 10 of them who stood on the teleportation platform, and then his gaze descended onto Yang Yi in the end. As he gazed at Yang Yi, a wisp of a complicated expression flashed in Yu Heng's eyes, a genius that has comprehended sword intent. Unfortunately, he doesn't belong to the sword sect anymore. After a short while, Yu Heng calmed his emotions and said, "I'll get straight to the point. Besides the rewards provided during the Ascension rankings, those able to ascend the Ascension rankings will be given a low-grade Earth rank sword and sword technique. Moreover, the sword sect will provide an endless supply of energy stones to those disciples for 3 years and permit those disciples to cultivate in the sword servant pagoda." All the disciples beneath the platform seethed with excitement when they heard this while the participating disciples on the platform were excited as well. It was even to the extent that the gazes of the elders burned with envy and wished for nothing more than to replace those disciples to participate in the Ascension rankings. Because these rewards were too abundant, no one could remain unmoved by a low-grade Earth rank sword and sword technique. Yang Yi was slightly surprised as well. He was surprised that the sword sect was actually so generous. After all, both the sword and sword technique were priceless treasures, and obtaining either one could cause one's strength to improve greatly. It was even to the extent that it could be made to be an heirloom of a family. Not to mention everyone else, even he was slightly tempted. Besides the sword and sword technique, the endless supply of energy stones for 3 years was extremely tempting as well because it represented that one didn't have to worry about resources for those 3 years of time. On the other hand, the permission to cultivate in the Sword Servant Pagoda represented that one had a superb place to cultivate at. Simply speaking, so long as one ascended the Ascension rankings, then one would gain both fame and fortune. Yang Yi quickly calmed down because he felt that it wasn't so simple. If all 10 of them could ascend the rankings, then didn't it meant that the Sword Sect had to give 10 Earth rank swords away? Perhaps the Sword Sect had 10 Earth rank swords, but it would definitely not give them away easily. In other words, the higher-ups of the Sword Sect didn't look favorably upon their ability to ascend the rankings at all. Since the Sword Sect didn't look favorably upon them, then it represented that the Sword Sect had definitely gathered information about the geniuses from the other powers and knew of their strengths. When he thought up to this point, Yang Yi looked at Su Qingshi while he decided that he would definitely look for a chance to ask Su Qingshi about this. His target was the first position, and truthfully speaking, he wasn't really confident in his ability to accomplish it. Because how huge was the Southern Territory? How numerous were the monstrous geniuses in it? Even though he'd comprehended sword intent and attained the enlightened sword heart, it didn't represent that he was invincible amongst the younger generation. Ascending the Ascension rankings was related to his mother, so he couldn't be careless at all, and it couldn't be any better if he was able to obtain information about his opponents. Just as Yang Yi thought, the higher-ups of the Sword Sect really didn't look favorably upon these disciples. If Yang Ye's cultivation was slightly higher, then perhaps he would have a chance. After all, Yang Yi had comprehended sword intent. However, Yang Yi was merely at the 2nd rank of the First Heaven Realm, so how strong could he be? Even though the higher-ups didn't look favorably upon them, it didn't mean they had no chance at all. Since there was hope, then encouragement was needed. Generous rewards roused the courage in all, so the Sword Sect's rewards were abundant to a shocking degree. Just as Yu Hong had said, he didn't waste his breath after he finished. He said, "Set out to the Imperial Capital, Sword Commanding Elder." Right at this moment, an inner court disciple walked out from the crows. He bowed to Yu Hong before he said, "Disciple has something to say." When she saw this disciple step forward, Murong Yao looked at Yang Yi while she seemed to reveal a trace of taking pleasure in his misfortune. Yang Ye's brows knit together slightly when he saw this person, because this person's appearance was extremely similar to Situ Rong. In other words, this person was probably that younger brother of Situ Rong's, that person he'd pushed out from the list of participating disciples. Now that Situ Rong's younger brother had stood out, it was probably because of this matter. Yu Heng frowned as well and said, "What is it?" The inner court disciple bowed once more and said, "Sword Commanding Elder, disciple was supposed to be amongst the participants this time, and disciple doesn't understand why disciple has been suddenly removed from the list. Has disciple done something wrong? Or is disciple's strength insufficient? It was I who removed you." Meanwhile, Su Qingsher said, "The reason is that there's someone more suitable than you." A cold light flashed in this disciple's eyes, and then he suddenly pointed at Yang Yi and said, "Because of him? If it is, then disciple refuses to accept it. Because he's merely at the 2nd rank of the 1st heaven realm, while disciple is at the 7th rank of the 1st heaven realm." Su Qingsher frowned. She was just about to speak when Yu Heng suddenly said, "Since you refuse to accept it, then how about you have a spar with Yang Yi? The winner will participate in the ascension rankings, all right?" Su Qingsher knew about Yang Ye's strength, but besides her, all the other higher-ups of the sword sect knew nothing. So, Yu Heng really wanted to know exactly how formidable Yang Ye's strength was. He didn't have a suitable chance in the past, but he had one now. "Disciple agrees." That inner court disciple spoke hurriedly. Yu Heng looked at Yang Yi and said, "Yang Yi, what do you think?" "I agree." Yang Yi glanced at the young man before he spoke flatly. As soon as he finished speaking, his figure flashed and descended before the young man. "Who do you look favorably upon?" Qin Feng, who stood by Murong Yao's side, suddenly asked her this question. A wisp of a cold smile suffused the corners of Murong Yap's mouth as she said, "Qin Feng, I know you look down on Yang Yi a little, and think that he merely possesses the strength of the 2nd rank of the 1st heaven realm. But I want to tell you that even I am not confident in my ability to defeat him. Situ Bo is purely looking for a beating. He's really that strong?" Qin Feng frowned. He admitted that someone capable of ascending to the 22nd level of the Sword Servant Pagoda was definitely not trash. But he didn't believe that Yang Ye's strength wasn't inferior to this demonic woman by his side, because it had been too short a period of time since Yang Yi advanced into the 1st heaven realm, and Yang Ye's cultivation was even numerous ranks below Situ Bo. Murong Yao didn't say anything, and she just gazed at Yang Yi, who stood below the platform. The might of the sword chest Yang Yi utilized on that day was still vivid in her mind, especially that unusual sword technique. Even she had no choice but to fear it. Senior brother Situ, Yang Yi has supposedly passed through the 22nd level of the Sword Servant Pagoda. Isn't it slightly unsuitable to ask junior brother Situ Bo to act in this way? After all, with Yang Ye's natural talent and potential, he would definitely become an extraordinary genius in the future. A young man by Situ Rong's side spoke to him. "You're speaking about the future." Situ Rong glanced at Yang Yi, who stood below the platform, and said, "I admit that if both he and Murong Yao were given time, then their future accomplishments would definitely not be inferior to us. But so what about that? Could it be that my younger brother should just submissively give away the opportunity to participate in the ascension rankings? My younger brother's strength is comparatively weaker indeed, but I refuse to believe that he would be unable to gain a spot in the rankings with my help. You ought to be very clearly aware of what ascending the rankings represents." The young man by Situ Rong's side nodded lightly. He naturally understood what it meant. Right, if someone took my place, I would definitely be extremely displeased as well. Especially if it was a person whose cultivation was a few ranks lower than my own. "Who do all of you think will win?" asked an outer court disciple standing beneath the platform. "Situ Bo. He isn't just a senior inner court disciple, he's even at the 7th rank of the 1st heaven realm. On the other hand, Yang Yi seems to have just advanced into the 1st heaven realm not too long ago, right? With so many ranks of cultivation between them, how could he possibly defeat Situ Bo? Actually, I'm very curious as well. I'm curious why the sword sect would give Situ Bo's position to Yang Yi. Have you forgotten that Yang Yi instantly annihilated Lu Qingyu while he was at the 9th rank of the mortal realm? Exactly. Yang Yi was able to kill a first heaven realm profounder while at the 9th rank of the mortal realm. Now that he has attained the first heaven realm, how terrifying would his strength be? Not to mention that the elders aren't idiots. Since they gave Situ Bo's position to Yang Yi, then there's definitely a reason for it. All right, all of you stop arguing. Wouldn't we know the answer once they fight? Beneath the platform, Situ Bo tilted his sword slightly and pointed it towards the ground, and then he gazed coldly at Yang Yi and said, I heard you passed the 22nd level of the Sword Servant Pagoda. Yang Yi nodded, and then he said, Make your move. He understood Yu Heng's intentions. Since Yu Heng wanted to witness his strength, then he didn't mind showing it to Yu Heng. Moreover, he didn't just plan to show his strength to Yu Heng, he intended to show it to the others that were participating in the Ascension rankings as well. Because one could only obtain respect by possessing strength. He understood this principle, so he'd agreed to fight this fellow for the sake of avoiding any future trouble. Situ Bo's face sank. Yang Yi hadn't even withdrawn a sword before asking him to attack. Is he trying to humiliate me? Take out your sword. I'll let you launch 3 moves first in order to avoid bullying you with my superior cultivation. Situ Bo spoke with a gloomy expression. Yang Yi was stunned. He'll let me launch 3 moves? When he saw Situ Bo's expression, Yang Yi immediately understood that Situ Bo had misunderstood his words as a form of humiliation. Yang Yi didn't explain anything. He just suddenly stomped the ground with his right foot, causing his body to shoot forward explosively. At the same time, the ground where his foot was had collapsed, and it clearly showed the force behind this movement. Yang Yi still hadn't withdrawn a sword. He clenched his right hand into a fist and blasted it directly at Situ Bo. He didn't use any flashy moves, and it was just a very simple punch like this. Situ Bo didn't take the initiative to attack. He'd said in public that he would let Yang Yi launch 3 moves first. So, how could he go back on his word? However, when Yang Ye's fist arrived before him, he regretted speaking those words from before. The punch that seemed to be extremely ordinary a moment ago had suddenly become extremely fierce when it was about to arrive before Situ Bo. Moreover, the strength within the punch caused the air to be torn apart wherever it passed while the sound of air exploding resounded successively. Situ Bo was astounded. The disciples participating in the Ascension ranking were extremely shocked, and a wisp of surprise flashed in Yu Heng's eyes because Yang Ye's strength had shocked him. Situ Bo couldn't care about the words he'd spoken earlier. With a flip of his wrist, his sword left a string of afterimages behind as it slashed swiftly towards Yang Ye's fist. He didn't utilize a sword technique, nor did he have the time to use one. Moreover, he'd been careless and allowed Yang Yi to arrive before him. So, it was utterly impossible to avoid Yang Ye's attack, causing him to have no choice but to go head-on against it. Yang Yi didn't avoid the strike of the sword, and the speed of his fist increased instead. Bang! His fist smashed onto the sword. The low-grade, profound rank sword suddenly trembled before cracks instantly spread like spiderwebs on it. Situ Bo's face turned pale with fright. At the instant Yang Ye's fist came into contact with his sword, the sword in his had actually been on the verge of flying out of his grasp. Exactly how much physical strength does he possess? How terrifying is his physical defense? It wasn't just Situ Bo who was shocked. Everyone else in the surroundings was equally shocked. After going head-on with a low-grade profound rank sword with his fist, not only was his fist completely unharmed, the sword had almost been blasted into pieces. Is he a dark beast? Morong Yao's expression turned solemn when she witnessed this scene because she'd underestimated Yang Yi again. She originally thought that the sword chest and that unusual sword technique were Yang Ye's trump cards, but now it would seem like they were far from being his only trump cards. Situ Rong's expression was extremely solemn as well, going head-on against a low-grade profound rank sword with his bare fist yet remaining completely unharmed. This is utterly equivalent to the physical body of a 9th rank dark beast. How could this fellow called Yang Yi possess such a terrifying physical body? Below the platform, Situ Bo didn't have the time to think about it or feel shocked because Yang Yi had struck another punch at him. Situ Bo's wrist moved as he slashed his sword at Yang Yi again. Bang! The sword exploded into pieces while Yang Ye's fist didn't lose momentum at all, and it directly smashed towards Situ Bo's chest. Situ Bo was greatly startled, and he clenched his right palm into a fist and punched it at Yang Ye's fist. Crack! At the instant his fist encountered Yang Ye's fist, Situ Bo's expression changed rapidly. After that, a clear and resounding sound of bones cracking resounded. In the next moment, Situ Bo's figure was blasted backward like a rocket, and he flew around 15 before he smashed heavily onto the ground. Silence. The surroundings were extremely silent. He lost just like that. Situ Bo, who's at the 7th rank of the First Heaven Realm, was defeated just like that with 2 punches? Everyone in the surroundings felt dazed. Yang Yi withdrew his fist and shook his head as he gazed at Situ Bo, who lay on the ground in the distance. And then he turned around and walked towards the teleportation platform. Situ Bo did possess some strength, but Situ Bo shouldn't have underestimated his opponent. If he hadn't underestimated his opponent and directly utilized a sword technique at the beginning of the battle, then it would have been utterly impossible for Yang Yi to defeat him so easily by just relying on his fist. Unfortunately, Situ Bo had been too careless. Not only had Situ Bo allowed Yang Yi to get close to himself, he even exchanged a punch with Yang Yi. Wasn't that equivalent to courting death? Situ Rong leaped off the platform and arrived by Situ Bo's side. When he saw Situ Bo's twisted arm, his face instantly turned savage as he suddenly turned around to look at Yang Yi. He said, "It was merely a simple spar, yet you actually landed such a heavy blow against someone from the same sect. How ruthless of you. I've held back already." Yang Yi stopped moving. He turned around to shoot a glance at Situ Rong, and then he turned around and continued walking up the platform. "You held back." Situ Rong's face was savage as he said, "You held back? Huh. Junior brother Yang Yi possesses shocking strength, and my hands itch for battle. I want to seek guidance from junior brother Yang Yi. I wonder if junior brother Yang Yi will give me the honor." Yang Yi stopped once more. He turned around to look at Situ Rong and said, "Are you sure it's your hands that itch and not your skin?" He really had held back in the battle with Situ Bo. Otherwise, if he utilized his full strength, that punch alone would have been sufficient to shatter all the bones in Situ Bo's body. The battle with Situ Bo was a simple spar, and there was no need to decide life and death in the battle because Situ Bo had never intended to kill him. However, if Situ Rong dared to make a move against him, then he felt he would make Situ Rong unable to participate in the Ascension rankings because he saw killing intent in Situ Rong's eyes. Ha ha ha! Situ Rong started laughing from extreme rage. What high-sounding sentiments! Who does he think he is? Right when he was about to attack, Yu Heng appeared between the two of them, and he glanced at Situ Bo, who was lying unconscious on the ground, before he gazed at Yang Yi and said, "You injured him excessively." "I don't think so," Yang Yi said indifferently. "He should feel fortunate that he encountered me. If it was a disciple of the Ghost Sect or another sect, then does Sword Commanding Elder think that he would have a chance to survive?" Yu Heng was stunned, and then he shook his head and said, "Drop this matter now. Head to the Imperial capital." Amidst Situ Rong's resentful gaze, Yang Yi stepped foot into the teleportation formation that led to the Imperial capital with Murong Yao and the others. The Ascension rankings could be described as a grand even in the Southern Territory. It wasn't just the 6 great powers that would be participating, even those large clans, small clans, and some reclusive clans would participate as well. Under such circumstances, it was obvious how people would stream into the Imperial capital, so the streets of the capital could simply be described as being filled with an ocean of people. Besides Profounder, a group of guards that wore silver armor would walk by the streets every 15 minutes. The eyes of all the Profounders on the streets would reveal fear when they saw these guards, because these groups of guards were formed by King Realm and First Heaven Realm experts. During this month of time, the guards possessed the authority to act first and report later. In other words, if a Profounder dared to cause trouble in the Imperial capital, then the guards could kill that Profounder first before reporting the matter to their superiors. It wasn't that the Grand Qin Empire was acting in an overbearing manner, it was authorized by all 6 great powers and the Empire itself. Because if they didn't provide such authorization, then trouble would probably arise within the Imperial capital. under the effect of the deterrence from these groups of guards. Even though the number of people within the imperial capital was multiplying, no trouble had appeared. A measurement pillar resided at the entrance to the imperial capital. The pillar was 3 m tall, 1 m wide, and a thin piece of crystal was stuck to the lower half of the stone pillar. It was deeply embedded into the stone pillar, and there were 10 rows of quartz on it. Moreover, every single row had 10 quartz stones. This pillar was utilized to measure the strengths of profounders. So long as a profounder launched an attack against this pillar, then the quartz stones on it would light up. The more quartz stones that lit up, the greater that profounder strength was. Profounders that came to the imperial capital would usually measure their strengths because it was also an opportunity to attain fame. At this moment, countless profounders were gathered at the entrance of the capital, and there was an entire 10,000 plus of them. None of them attacked the measurement pillar, and they were looking at an enormous teleportation platform outside the entrance instead. It was as if they were waiting for something. The 6 great powers were prohibited from establishing teleportation platforms within the imperial capital, so they'd establish them outside the capital instead. Which bastard said that the 6 great powers would arrive today? The sun is already about to set, so why is there no sign of them yet? A boorish man spat towards the ground and spoke with slight displeasure. Wait a while longer. They ought to be here soon, said a handsome young man by the boorish man's side. I've been waiting from the morning because I wanted to witness the strengths of these disciples from the 6 great sections. If I knew they would be so slow, I would have fucking gone to Moon Indulgence Pavilion to enjoy myself. The boorish man continued speaking with displeasure. Doesn't every single person gathered here desire to witness their strengths? The handsome young man said, It's said that the disciples of the sects are monstrous geniuses. Even I want to witness exactly how monstrous these disciples of the sects are. Monstrous geniuses? A wisp of disdain arose on the corners of the boorish man's mouth. He said, I, Lao Nyo, will steam the limelight from these disciples of the sects and allow them to realize that we independent cultivators are the true monstrous geniuses. The handsome young man smiled when he heard this, and he didn't speak further. Pretty boy, do you not believe me? The boorish man was slightly infuriated when he saw the handsome young man merely smiled and said nothing. The handsome young man pointed at the measurement pillar and said, Brother, you can measure your strength with this pillar first. The members of the 6 great powers will definitely do the same once they arrive here. So we'll know exactly who's more formidable in a while. What do you think? Why not? The boorish man grunted coldly, and then he walked over to the pillar. He took a deep breath and stretched his hand out horizontally. After that, he raised his hand slowly while the image of a mountain slowly formed on his hand. At a certain moment in time, the boorish man shouted loudly before his right hand slapped swiftly at the pillar. Mountain palm. His palm descended, yet the pillar didn't move at all, and then 71 quartz stones lit up on it. The young man shook his head when he saw 71 quartz stones light up. The boorish man was at the 7th rank of the first heaven realm, so being able to light up this amount of quartz stones was really good when it was amongst independent cultivators. However, if such an achievement were to be compared with the disciples of the 6 great powers, then the boorish man would undoubtedly be asking for insult. The other spectators in the surroundings revealed expressions of admiration, but most revealed disdain. 71 quartz stones could be considered as being at an intermediate level at most, and when the disciples of the 6 great powers arrived, then 71 quartz stones could only be considered as third-rate or trash. In the crowd, a woman with a hot and sexy figure spoke with disdain. Big brother, he merely lit 71 stones up, yet he dared to boast about going against the disciples of the sects. The ignorant are truly fearless. Qing Hong, are you making a comparison with Brother Yang again? A man with a robust figure stood by the woman's side, and he said in a slightly speechless manner, Can you not compare them with an ordinary person? Brother Yang isn't ordinary at all. Don't you know that? The woman was none other than Qing Hong, and the robust man was Qing Hong's older brother, Manzi. The young man that remained silent by Manzi's side was Xiao He. The 3 of them naturally refused to miss such a grand event. Qing Hong puckered her lips, And then she looked at the teleportation platform and said, "Big brother, do you think Xianxia will come?" Manzi shrugged and said, "How would I know? But I think that he probably wouldn't. Even though Brother Yang's strength is extremely formidable, it should be insufficient to participate in the Ascension rankings. Even if he wanted to participate, the Sword Sect would probably not allow it. After all, if one didn't possess sufficient strength during the Ascension rankings, then it would lead to death. But I feel that he will come." Qing Hong spoke in a firm tone. Manzi shook his head. She feels he will come? Can feelings like this be trusted? In any case, he didn't believe such feelings. They're here. It's the disciples of the Sword Sect. The Sword Sect has arrived. Right at this moment, someone roared loudly. Everyone shot their gazes over upon hearing this. A bright light flashed on the teleportation formation, and then over 10 people appeared there. "It's Xianxia. Big brother, it's Xianxia." Qing Hong instantly found Xianxia's figure, and her beautiful eyes flickered with happiness and excitement. Manzi smiled as well when he saw Xianxia. He had a very good impression of Xianxia, or it should be said that he'd sincerely taken Xianxia to be his friend. So, wasn't it normal to be happy when one saw a friend? Xianxia hadn't noticed Qing Hong, Manzi, and Xiao He. Presently, he was very surprised, just like the others by his side. He was surprised that there were actually so many people in the surroundings. "Sword Commanding Elder, have all these people come to welcome us?" asked Qin Feng. The others looked at Yu Heng as well and desired the answer to this question. Yu Heng smiled bitterly and said, "Such wishful thinking. See that pillar? That's the measurement pillar, and it measures one's strength." They'd come to witness the strengths of the disciples from the various sections. "So, don't let me down and strive to light up 90 quartz stones at least to bring honor to our sword sect." The others nodded when they heard this. "Do all of you know how many quartz stones Elder Su lit up all those years ago?" Right at this moment, the man by Su Qingshi's side suddenly smiled as he asked this question. Everyone gazed at Su Qingshi and that inner court elder with curious expressions. Xianxia's eyes revealed curiosity as well. Su Qingshi had ascended the Ascension rankings all those years ago, so her results would probably be extremely good. 93. The man smiled and said, "Your elder Su lit 93 quartz stones up all those years ago, and she reigned supreme over the geniuses from the ghost sect that had come to participate in the Ascension rankings at that time. Perhaps all of you think that 93 quartz stones aren't really great, but you won't think like that once you've tried measuring your strengths with that pillar. How many did the Origin School light up at that time?" Xianxia suddenly asked this question. Since the Origin School had obtained the first position at that time, then the disciples of the Origin School had presumably lit up even more quartz stones, and he was very curious about it. Because only by understanding the strength of the Origin School would he be able to accurately evaluate his own strength. The others revealed curious gazes when they heard Xianxia. They wondered exactly how formidable were the monstrous geniuses that came from the true colossus of the Southern Territory, the Origin School. The man by Su Qingshi's side revealed slight displeasure in his eyes. He'd mentioned this topic merely for the sake of making Su Qingshi happy. However, this disciple before him had actually been so insensible and mentioned a question that might cause Su Qingshi to feel embarrassed. Right when he was about to berate Xianxia, Su Qingshi said, 97. It was a genius of the Origin School that lit the most quartz stones up at that time, and he was ranked at the first position on the Ascension rankings as well. Even though the difference between our results was only 4 quartz stones, the gap between us was actually extremely huge, because it's extremely difficult to light up every single quartz stone after the 90th. All of you will understand in a while. When he saw Su Qingshi had actually spoken to provide an explanation, a wisp of surprise flashed in the man's eyes. He glanced at Su Qingshi, and then glanced at Xianxia before he fell silent. Exactly how huge was the gap between 97 and 93 quartz? One could only understand it after giving the measurement pillar a try. All of them arrived at the entrance to the city under Yu Heng's lead. And then Yu Heng swept his gaze past Xianxia and the others before it descended onto Situ Rong. He said, "Situ Rong, you give it a try first." Situ Rong revealed a delighted expression, and a feeling of superiority instantly arose and swept through his heart. The sword-commanding elder had asked him to be the first, so what did that represent? It represented that the sword-commanding elder thought very highly of him and felt that he could make a good start for the sword sect here. Right when Situ Rong had walked over to the measurement pillar and intended to measure his strength, someone suddenly exclaimed once more, "The ghost sect has arrived." When they heard this, all the others in the surroundings gazed towards the teleportation platform in unison, and even the members of the sword sect had done the same. But unlike the others in the surroundings, the members of the sword sect had hostile gazes. There were only 4 members from the ghost sect, and all of them wore black robes that had skeletons printed on them. Their group consisted of a red-haired old man who held a pitch-black stick and 3 young men around the age of 17. "That's Elder Kugu, an Exalt Realm expert." Morong Yao, who stood by Yang Ye's side, spoke in a low voice. "Elder Kugu?" Yang Yi said, "I don't know who he is. He's from the same generation as the sword-commanding elder, and his strength is extremely formidable. Countless disciples of my sword sect have perished at his hand." Morong Yao said, "In short, if you encounter him by yourself, alas, it's best if you don't, because encountering him would be equivalent to death." Yang Yi nodded with agreement, because how could an Exalt Realm expert be in existence he could go against now? "See that young man behind Kugu? He's probably Xiao Luo. According to the elders, he has comprehended slaughter intent, and he'll be our greatest enemy this time." Morong Yao gazed at the young man with a rather solemn expression, but there wasn't any fear in her eyes. Yang Yi gazed at the young man. The young man was around his age and had a very handsome appearance. He wasn't unpleasant to look at like the other disciples of the ghost sect, and he gave off an innocent feeling. However, Yang Yi would naturally not believe that he was innocent because it was impossible for a person that had comprehended slaughter intent to have not dyed his hands with blood. Even though he seems innocent, he's actually extremely ruthless. According to rumor, he hadn't just killed both his parents in order to comprehend slaughter intent. He'd even annihilated over 1,800 people that formed his entire clan. In short, he'd killed everyone that was even slightly related to him. In the end, an expert of the ghost sect was satisfied with his ability and took him back to the ghost sect. Supposedly, no one in the ghost sect dares to become his master. Morong Yao spoke in a low voice. "He killed both his parents?" Yang Ye's expression turned solemn. If this was true, then his perverseness had simply arrived at an unimaginable level. I really have to be extremely careful of this madman. However, for some unknown reason, Yang Yi felt that those 2 people by Xiao Luo's side were the ones that were truly dangerous. Both of them were slightly older than Xiao Luo, yet they seemed even more innocent from the outside when compared to Xiao Luo. But Yang Yi felt that both of them weren't simple, and it was even to the extent that he felt they were even more dangerous than Xiao Luo. The 4 members of the ghost sect disregarded everyone and directly walked over to the members from the sword sect. The old man with red hair swept his gaze past Morong Yao and the others before he looked at Yu Hong in the end and smiled coldly. "Yu Hong, I never expected that it would actually be you who led the group this time. What? You're afraid the disciples of your sword sect would die prematurely?" "Of course I am," Yu Hong ridiculed. "Kugu, if your ghost sect participated in the ascension rankings in an upright manner, then my sword sect would naturally have no need to fear your ghost sect. However, your ghost sect always resorts to despicable methods, so my sword sect naturally has to be fearful. After all, these juniors can't go against those spirit realm experts of your ghost sect, right?" Kugu glanced at Yang Yi and the others who stood behind Yu Hong, and then he said with disdain, "Are they even worthy of making my ghost sect utilize spirit realm experts? Yu Hong, you truly think too highly of them." Situ Rong and the others were furious when they heard this, yet they didn't dare interrupt. "Kugu, don't tell me that it wasn't your ghost sect who dispatched experts to kill the participating disciples of my sword sect at that time, and don't tell me that it wasn't your ghost sect that hatched the recent plot against the participating disciples of my sword sect. If the disciples of your ghost sect weren't afraid of the disciple from my sword sect, then why would there be any necessity to use such despicable methods?" Yu Hong spoke coldly. "Fear the disciples of your sword sect?" Kugu smiled gloomily and said, Yu Hong, arguing here with you is meaningless. The measurement pillar is right here, and the strongest disciples in the younger generation of our sects are here as well. Why don't we ask them to give it a try? And let everyone here see exactly who is afraid of who. That's exactly what I wanted. Yu Hong glanced at the three youths behind Kugu and said, You first. You were here first, so you first. Kugu acted courteously. Yu Hong turned around to look at Situ Rong before he said in a low voice, Don't hold back. Situ Rong nodded. He would naturally not hold back because it was related to the sword sect's reputation. He took a deep breath before the profound energy within his entire body surged, and then with a flip of his wrist, a sword appeared in his hand. His profound energy poured into the sword, and the sword instantly howled. At a certain moment in time, Situ Rong shouted loudly, and then he stabbed the sword towards the pillar. Instantly, numerous energy swords shot out explosively from the tip of the sword towards the pillar. Bang! In merely a breath of time, no less than 30+ energy sword had struck the pillar, and then the quartz at the lower portion of the pillar suddenly lit up. Everyone swept their gazes over, and they noticed that an entire 91 had lit up. 91! How formidable, as expected of a member of the 6 great powers. Right? Where's that fellow from before that wanted to show these disciples of the sects how monstrous independent cultivators are? He really is formidable. Even an ordinary King Realm expert wouldn't be able to light 91 quartz stones up. The disciples of the sects really are monstrous. Independent cultivators really can't compare to the disciples of the sections. Alas, I should have worked harder and looked for a sect to join. How I regret it. Situ Rong instantly revealed happiness on his face when he heard the people in the surroundings, and then he shot a provocative gaze at the 3 young men from the ghost sect. He hadn't noticed that both Xianxia and Yu Hong had frowned slightly at this moment because they were clearly aware that Situ Rong hadn't exerted his full strength at all and was concealing his strength. 91 quartz stones were really very good amongst independent cultivators, but if it was amongst the elite disciples of the sects, then it could only be considered as a passing score. If it was at any other time, then Xianxia and Yu Hong would approve of Situ Rong holding back. However, holding back at such a moment seemed to be extremely foolish because it was related to the sword sect's reputation. This is the strength of a disciple from your sword sect. How disappointing! Elder Kugu ridiculed, and then he turned around to look at the 3 young men behind him. Which one of you will do it? Xiao Luo stood forward. He didn't even spare a glance at Situ Rong before directly walking over to the pillar, and then he flicked his finger. A strand of blood shot explosively towards the pillar, and then row after row of quartz stones lit up until a total of 93 had been lit up. My God! 93 stones have actually been lit up. This is the best result up until now, right? It's actually 2 stones better than the sword sect. How formidable! 93! Even King Realm experts below the 5th rank of the King Realm would find it very difficult to accomplish. Who is he? He actually possesses such terrifying strength. I recognize him, his name is Xiao Luo. Supposedly, he has comprehended slaughter intent. If he utilized his slaughter intent, then he would probably light up 95 quartz stones or even more. Slaughter intent. The others in the surroundings gasped when they heard this. Situ Rong's face burned because he'd really been slapped on the face in public. Yu Hong and Xianxia's faces were slightly unsightly. Even though the people in the surroundings hadn't spoken about their sword sect, there was no doubt that the sword sect had really lost face this time. Meanwhile, Xiao Luo glanced at Murong Yao and the others before his gaze descended onto Situ Rong in the end. He said, If everyone in the younger generation of the sword sect is at a similar level as you, then it would truly be too boring. As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around and walked back towards the other 2 young men. Wait! Right at this moment, Murong Yao stood out, and Xiao Luo turned around to look at her before he said, What? Murong Yao didn't speak. She walked over to the pillar, and then she stretched out her right hand before lightly clenching her fingers together. An energy sword formed from profound energy appeared in her hand, and as her profound energy was ceaselessly poured into it, the energy sword grew more and more material. After 2 breaths of time, The energy sword seemed like a real sword, and it emanated a dazzling and resplendent glow in midair. Go! Murong Yao moved her wrist, causing the energy sword to shoot forward explosively. Bang! An enormous bang resounded. The measurement pillar trembled lightly before the quartz stones instantly lit up beneath the astounded gazes of everyone in the surroundings. 95! Someone shouted from within the crowd. All the spectators in the surroundings gasped. 95! She's a true monstrous genius, and she can even be considered a monstrous genius in places like the Origin School and Imperial Academy. Situ Rong's expression remained unsightly, because even if he utilized his full strength, he wasn't confident in his ability to light up 95 quartz stones. However, this junior sister of his had actually lit 95 stones up, so didn't this mean that her strength wasn't inferior to his own? Yu Hong and Su Qingshi's unsightly expressions eased up slightly because the sword sect wouldn't be disgraced in public in the end. Looks like I underestimated her slightly. Yang Yi gazed at Murong Yao while he spoke in his heart. Even he didn't dare rashly utilize his body to directly resist the attack that Murong Yao had just executed. He was confident in his ability to resist it, but when he saw Murong Yao's composed expression, he knew that she hadn't utilized her full strength, and if she had, then the might of that attack would have been even more terrifying. The contempt in Xiao Luo's eyes had vanished, and he carefully sized up Murong Yao before he said, "Your strength isn't bad. You're qualified to become an opponent of mine. I'll see you during the Ascension rankings." As soon as he finished speaking, Xiao Luo didn't waste his breath, and he turned around to walk over to Elder Kugu's side. After Xiao Luo returned to Kugu's side, another young man behind Kugu walked out. The young man swept Yang Yi and the others with his gaze before it descended onto Murong Yao in the end. After that, he shook his head and said, "Pretty good strength, appearance, and figure. But what a pity, such a pity." As soon as he finished speaking, the young man didn't wait for Murong Yao to speak before he walked straight towards the measurement pillar. After that, he bent his right hand so that his palm faced the ground, and then a strand of black energy flashed into appearance on his palm. However, just at this moment, fluctuation arose from the teleportation formation again. "The Flower Palace has arrived, and the Snow Palace as well," someone exclaimed. Everyone looked over towards the teleportation formation again. Two groups of people had appeared on the platform. The group of 4 on the left wore long dresses that were covered in gorgeous flowers, whereas the group of 5 on the right wore pure white long dresses. Both these groups had a similarity, and it was that they were entirely made up of women. Besides that, all of them were extremely beautiful. "See the most beautiful woman amongst the group of women in white dresses on the right?" Murong Yao said to Yang Yi. "She's Lang Xinran, the representative of the Snow Palace. Supposedly, she had killed a King Realm expert in the past. Right. She possesses water element profound energy, so you must be careful if you fight her in the future." "What about the group on the left?" Yang Yi glanced at Lang Xinran before he moved his gaze towards the group from Flower Palace. Compared to the Snow Palace, he was even more interested in the Flower Palace. Murong Yao glanced at Yang Yi and said, "See the woman on the left whose face is covered by a veil? She's one Renew, and she's at the 9th rank of the First Heaven Realm. She's very mysterious, and there are no rumors about her. However, the more it is like this, the more we should be careful." "One Renew, huh?" Yang Yi nodded lightly, and then he looked at Murong Yao and said, "You seem to have very good knowledge about these geniuses." "Of course," Murong Yao said. "Only by constantly knowing the strengths of these monstrous geniuses from the Southern Territory would I be able to have an accurate understanding of my own strength. Otherwise, with the flattery of those inner court and outer court disciples of the Sword Sect, I would probably think I'm truly a monstrous genius just like Situ Rong does." Yang Yi smiled and said, "Now I understand why your strength is so formidable. Indeed, there wasn't a single piece of trash amongst those that were able to become experts, just like Murong Yao. You're not bad yourself, because I sense an aura of danger from you." Murong Yao's brows raised as she spoke. "We're on the same boat now, so even if I'm dangerous, I'm only a threat to others, right?" Yang Yi smiled as he spoke. It would be good if all the participating disciples from the sword sect could think in that way. Morong Yao spoke flatly. Yang Yi smiled and didn't speak any further. He was able to sense that the senior inner court disciples led by Situ Rong really rejected Morong Yao, Qin Feng, and him. However, he didn't mind all of that. So long as they didn't offend him, then they would reject him as they pleased. In any case, it wouldn't harm him at all. The Snow Palace and Flower Palace seemed to be hostile against each other. Both groups glanced coldly at each other before simultaneously walking towards the entrance of the city. Cougar, Yu Heng. I didn't expect that it would be the two of you who are leading your respective groups. The beautiful woman leading the group from the Flower Palace noticed Yu Heng and Kugu with a single glance, and she spoke in a flat voice. Kai Feng, after a few tens of years, you're still as gorgeous as ever. Yu Heng had a slightly complicated expression in his eyes as he gazed at the beautiful woman, and he sighed with emotion. It seems like only yesterday that we were companions. Alas. A wisp of a complicated expression flashed in the eyes of the beautiful woman called Kai Feng as well, and she said, after a few tens of years, you're already on the verge of becoming a geezer. Time is unforgiving. Yu Heng shook his head and smiled. Meanwhile, the beautiful woman in the lead of the group from Snow Palace said coldly, please go somewhere else to rekindle your old flames, all right? Chao Feng's expression turned cold, and then she cracked a smile and said, so what about it? It's still better than someone who can't rekindle anything. The beautiful woman in the white dress glanced coldly at Kai Feng, and then she looked at Yu Heng and said, Yu Heng, you were an outstanding figure all those years ago. So what possessed you to make you take interest in this woman? Fortunately, you didn't choose to get together with this woman. Otherwise, she would have made you wear countless green hats throughout the years. You probably still don't know yet, but the male pet someone possesses has already exceeded 3 digits. Chao Feng's expression was slightly unsightly as she said, Bingyu, are you looking for a spar? You think I'm afraid of you? Bingyu laughed coldly. I'll be leaving first. Right when the atmosphere between them was confrontational, Kugu cupped his fists to the 2 women before he led the 3 young men away. He truly wasn't interested in being dragged into the enmity between the Snow Palace and Flower Palace. Yu Heng cupped his fist to them and intended to leave as well, because he didn't want to be dragged into the enmity between the Snow Palace and Flower Palace as well. The sword sect couldn't afford to offend either side, so it was best to leave. Is there someone called Yang Yi in your sword sect? Right when Yu Heng intended to leave, Kai Feng spoke abruptly. Situ Rong and the others looked at Yang Yi while Su Qingshi and Yu Heng frowned. Yang Yi was stunned as well. Could it be that she intends to look for trouble with me? However, he wasn't afraid because he possessed the identity of a talisman master. So he stood out immediately and said, I am him. When they heard Yang Yi, the disciples from Flower Palace looked at Yang Yi, especially Wenren Yu whose face was concealed by a veil. Her beautiful eyes flickered with a curious glow. Kai Feng sized Yang Yi up from top to bottom, and then she said, You're Feng Yu's son? Yang Yi gazed silently at her. The 2nd rank of the 1st heaven realm? I thought Feng Yu's son would be extraordinary, yet I never expected that you are merely at the 2nd rank of the 1st heaven realm. How disappointing. Kai Feng shook her head lightly. Are you done? Yang Yi spoke indifferently. Needless to say, Yang Ye's composed and calm expression was extremely detestable. Kai Feng's eyes narrowed slightly as she said, Don't think that you can sleep peacefully just because you have Lin Shan to rely on. If my Flower Palace wants to deal with someone, then even the Talisman Masters Association would be unable to stop it. Yang Yi nodded and said, I believe you. I'll be waiting. Aren't you afraid that your mother would die? Said Kai Feng in a low voice. Yang Yi suddenly started laughing. He laughed for a while before he said, With the Flower Palace's status in the Southern Territory, it wouldn't stoop so low as to utilize someone's mother to threaten that person, right? That may not necessarily be the case. Meanwhile, Bingyu said coldly from the side, The Flower Palace is even capable of rearing men, so how could they be incapable of using your mother to threaten you? Kid, take a word of warning from me. If the Flower Palace threatens you with your mother, then it's best that you don't make any compromise. Because the consequences of that would be you dying along with your mother, and even if you don't die, living would be worse than death. Thank you for your warning, senior. Yang Yi bowed slightly to Bingyu, and then he looked at Kai Feng and said, if there's nothing else, then I'll be leaving. A wisp of ghastly killing intent flashed through Kai Feng's eyes, while the profound energy within her body surged. Right at this moment, Xianxia suddenly appeared before Yang Yi and said, Senior Kai Feng wouldn't do something like bullying the weak, right? Yu Heng said as well, Kai Feng, give me some face and drop this matter for now, alright? Yang Yi was representing the Sword Sect now, so if he allowed Kai Feng to humiliate Yang Yi, then it wouldn't just be Yang Yi who lost face, the Sword Sect would lose face as well. After a short while, Kai Feng grunted coldly and said, I'll give Yu Heng face and drop the matter this time. Kid, I guarantee that you'll be reunited with your mother one day. At that time, I'll make living worse than death for you. Yang Ye's face remained expressionless, and he didn't say anything in retaliation as well. He turned around and walked into the city. He knew that this person before him was definitely just like Feng Yi and definitely bore a grudge against his mother, and that was the reason why she targeted him like this. At the same time, he knew that Kai Feng wasn't wrong. The Talisman Masters Association could protect him for a time, yet it was impossible for it to protect him for a lifetime. After all, if the Flower Palace dispatched a Spirit Realm expert or even Exalt Realm expert to assassinate him, then he wouldn't have any room to resist at all. So, he had to become stronger without end. Yang Yi. Suddenly, a familiar voice resounded from the side. Yang Yi turned his head to look over, and he saw Qing Hong smiling brilliantly at him. Moreover, Manzi and Xiao He were at her side. What are all of you doing here? Yang Yi walked over, and he couldn't help but reveal a smile on his face. Yu Heng, out of consideration for our relationship in the past, allow me to provide you with some advice. It's best that your sword sect doesn't interfere in the matters between Yang Yi and my Flower Palace. Doing so isn't beneficial to your sword sect at all. Chao Feng glanced coldly at Yang Yi, who was chatting happily with Qing Hong and the others, and she spoke in a cold voice. Yu Heng frowned. Isn't she being a little too haughty and overbearing with her words? Meanwhile, Xianxia suddenly said, whether we get involved or not is our sword sect's business. There's no need for your Flower Palace to worry about the matters between my sword sect and Yang Yi. You're Xianxia? Kai Feng's eyes narrowed. What? Xianxia's brows raised, and she didn't reveal even a shred of fear on her face. As expected of someone on the hidden dragon rankings. Kai Feng laughed coldly, and then she said, how full of arrogance. Xianxia was just about to speak when Bingyu from Snow Palace suddenly interrupted. Kai Feng, you're really getting worse the longer you live. You're an Exalt Realm expert at any rate, so don't you feel ashamed for making a fuss about this with the younger generation? Oh, right, you've always been shameless. So how could you feel ashamed? Why don't we head outside the city for a spar? Kai Feng looked at Bingyu while the killing intent in her eyes wasn't concealed at all. There's no rush for that. Bingyu said coldly. The disciples of both your Flower Palace and my Snow Palace are here today, so why don't we ask them to measure their strengths with the measurement pillar? Let's see if it's the disciples of your Flower Palace or my Snow Palace that are stronger. That's exactly what I was thinking, said Kai Feng. When he heard the conversation between Kai Feng and Bingyu, Yang Yi stopped chatting with Qing Hong's group of three and looked at the woman from the Flower Palace whose face was concealed behind a veil. Even though her appearance was obscured by it, based on her figure and bearing, she was presumably a peerless beauty. Of course, Yang Yi didn't care about her appearance, and he cared about her strength more. He wanted to see exactly how strong this representative of the Flower Palace's younger generation was. It wasn't just Yang Yi, Yu Heng, Xianxia, and the others who were about to leave had stopped and looked at the members of the Snow Palace and Flower Palace. Both these powers were merely inferior to the Origin School, and they wanted to see exactly how great the distance between their sword sect and these two palaces was. With a signal from Bingyu, a woman behind her walked out. The woman could be said to be especially striking amongst everyone here. Her appearance was extremely beautiful, but the most striking feature she possessed was her hair. Her hair wasn't black in color but silver instead. Yes, it was completely silver. Besides that, her bearing was especially cold. And even her face was icy cold, as if it described how others shouldn't get close to her. Su Qingxi's bearing was noble and indifferent, while this woman was dignified and cold. However, both of them had a similarity, and it was that they were extraordinarily beautiful. The silver-haired woman didn't look at anyone else. She walked directly to the measurement pillar, and then 96 quartz stones on the pillar lit up. Everyone in the surroundings was dumbstruck, and most were utterly bewildered. The expressions of the members of the Sword Sect and Flower Palace changed violently, and even Xianxia's expression was unprecedentedly solemn. The silver-haired woman seemed to have not done anything, but the members of both sects had witnessed it. It was exactly because they'd witnessed the attack that their expressions had changed violently. Because it was merely a single insignificant strand of the woman's hair that caused the quartz stones to light up. Most importantly, her method of attack was soundless and without signs that an attack was being launched. This was the most terrifying aspect of it, and it was what made Xianxia fearful the most. At the same time, Xianxia felt fortunate in his heart. He felt fortunate that he'd cultivated with Elder Mu in the past few months. Otherwise, if he participated in the ascension rankings with his strength from that time, then not to mention obtaining the first, even ascending onto the rankings would be a problem. Just a strand of her hair possessed such terrifying might. The participating disciples from the Sword Sect suffered a blow to their confidence, and Situ Rong's expression was slightly unsightly. Even if he utilized all his ability and trump cards, he would still be unable to attain a result of 96 lit quartz stones. This caused Situ Rong, who was originally filled with confidence, to think in his heart, "Could it be I'm really too weak?" The contempt and disdain in Kai Feng's eyes had completely vanished, and only a solemn expression remained there. After the quartz stones lit up, the silver-haired woman turned around and walked off to stand behind Bingyu. From the beginning until the end, she hadn't spoken a single word, and she'd merely shot a glance at Wenrinyu as she returned to where she stood behind Bingyu. Wenrinyu's expression was concealed, but her eyes were calm to the extreme and without the slightest ripple. When the silver-haired woman glanced at her, she'd glanced at the silver-haired woman as well, and then she walked slowly towards the pillar. Meanwhile, everyone in the surroundings recovered from their shock. Numerous profounders didn't know how the silver-haired woman had struck the pillar, but they knew that 96 quartz stones had lit up because of her. 96. Such a result was similar to the geniuses of the Origin School from last year, yet a member of the Snow Palace had attained such a result now. Is the Snow Palace going to surpass the Origin School this time? All the spectators in the surroundings felt both shocked and excited because a fierce struggle between evenly matched opponents was the most meaningful. When Wenrinyu walked over to the pillar, the gazes of everyone in the surroundings had descended onto her because everyone really wanted to find out the results of this monstrous genius from the Flower Palace. As she stood before the pillar, Wenrinyu lightly raised her fair hand. Suddenly, a petal formed purely from profound energy appeared on her palm. The petal was thumb-sized, crystalline, and resplendent. After an instant passed, the petal started spinning on her palm, and it grew faster and faster to the point one couldn't make out the shape of the petal. "Go!" Wenrinyu flicked with her finger, and the petal transformed into a ray of white light that shot at the pillar. Hiss! A sharp and ear-piercing sound of air being torn apart resounded, and it was the sound of the petal tearing the air apart as it shot forward. Bang! An explosion resounded, and then 96 quartz stones lit up. As she gazed at the lit stones, Kai Feng heaved a slight sigh of relief in her heart. Earlier, she was slightly worried that Wenrinyu would lose because if that had happened, then she might be utterly ridiculed by Bingyu. Fortunately, even though Wenrinyu hadn't won, she hadn't lost as well. Even though they'd both caused 96 quartz stones to light up, none of the spectators in the surroundings felt shocked as they had earlier. After all, that silver-haired woman had accomplished it soundlessly. Ha ha! How bustling with excitement! Right at this moment, light-hearted laughter resounded from afar. Everyone turned around to look over, and they saw a young man had suddenly appeared on the teleportation platform. The young man had a handsome appearance, wore a moon-white robe, and had a smile on his face. It's the Origin School's Yuan Hua, who's ranked at the 4th position on the Origin School's outer court rankings. Meanwhile, Murong Yao suddenly said to Yang Yi, according to rumor, King Realm experts aren't a match for him at all. It's even to the extent that rumors say he has fled from Spirit Realm experts in the past. The former about defeating King Realm experts is probably true, but few believe the latter to be true. Do you believe it? Asked Yang Yi. Murong Yao glanced at Yang Yi and said, I only believe what I've witnessed with my own 2 eyes. Wouldn't we find out about his strength in a moment? Yang Yi nodded. Yuan Hua walked over to stand before Kaifeng and Bingyu, and then he cupped his fists to them and said, Junior Yuan Hua greets seniors. Nobody knew if he'd done it intentionally or not, but Yuan Hua seemed as if he hadn't noticed Yu Hong from the Sword Sect. Kid, your Origin School merely sent you alone? Asked Kaifeng. Of course not. Yuan Hua smiled and said, a total of 5 disciples have come from my Origin School this time. My other 4 senior brothers have already entered the Imperial capital via other teleportation platforms. My senior brothers know that many wish to witness the strength of my Origin School, so they sent me to display my mediocre ability. Kid, my Flower Palace and the Snow Palace have both lit 96 stones up this time. For the sake of your Origin School's reputation, it's best that you ask your senior brother to come over. Otherwise, you might really be displaying mediocre ability, said Bingyu in a cold voice. 96 quartz stones, a very good result. The results of both your palaces are much better than last year. Yuan Hua smiled as he said, however, it's inadvisable for me to trouble my senior brothers for such a trivial matter. Otherwise, I would get a scolding. Then please display that mediocre ability of yours, said Bingyu in a cold voice. Yuan Hua nodded and didn't waste his breath anymore. He walked over to the pillar, and then raised his palm and slapped it down at the pillar. Bang! Along with an enormous bang, a total of 98 quartz stones suddenly lit up on the pillar. A wave of exclaims resounded in the surroundings while all the members of the Sword Sect, Flower Palace, and Snow Palace were visibly moved. Ha ha! Yuan Hua laughed as he walked into the city, and it wasn't long before he vanished from their fields of vision. How formidable! Murong Yao spoke in a low voice as she gazed at the quartz stones on the pillar. He's very formidable indeed, Yang Yi agreed.